The late morning program with Namarasa podcast.
Hare Krishna, you are listening to the number one Hare Krishna podcast in the world, the late morning program with Namarasa. This is your host, Namarasa, and I'm here with a recurring guest, His Holiness, BP Padmanabha Maharaj. Maharaj, thank you again for joining me.
Thank you so much for the invitation again.
Yes. So Maharaj, this is going to be an interesting one. Let's talk a little bit about the last podcast. So the last podcast was about, is bhakti inherent in the Jiva? And it seems like this is I did not know personally that this was a very contentious issue amongst the Gaudiya Vaishnava community. So let's talk a little bit about the repercussions that you faced kind of in talking about this topic.
Okay. Yeah, I did not know either that it was such a contentious topic myself. So I'm kind of also awakening to that fact, to that reality, which somehow further confirms what we were speaking in 1 month ago about the need for dialogue and the need for sitting together and at least start to hear each other and try to know each other and understand each other, because the fact that there is so much friction, if you will, in some topics, or even sometimes beyond the topic in itself, with some situation may be challenging our present conviction, that shows that there is some healthy need for dialogue. So regarding the repercussion of the podcast, of course, there were different types of repercussions from one extreme to the other. I mean, I remember someone wrote me from Bengal, asked me that if I could become his guru, to the other extreme, that I was a traitor to the whole sampradaya and the deviant and an aparadi. So you have all the nuanced shades in between as well.
Yeah.
But in general terms, of course, many devotees really appreciated the content and were nourished by it. But of course, to be fair, at the same time, there were some other members of the audience who disagreed with my points. Some of them, of course, the podcast was not only about the topic, but there were some focus in that direction. And there was some threat, as you may know, and many of you may know, after those days and weeks trying to communicate with each other. Unfortunately, at least in my consideration, in some cases, I felt the situation got a little bit heated and generally falling into very, common places, like accusing the other party, the anti-party, and this is the deviant, this is the sahaja, this is the aparadi. Basically, sometimes because one is saying something different from what that person was accustomed to hear from their guru. And I understand the situation, I understand how challenging that may be, but also I think that it's important not to very easily jump into some extreme emotionality and developing this mechanism of protection and seeing enemies around or something like that, and concluding even, I unfortunately have this type of exchanges, some people telling me only the people from my particular lineage is the only bona fide one, and whoever says something different, and so on. So I think these points confirm in a little bit what we were speaking in the first communication, our referred podcast, the 3 types of conversation: Sambad, Jalpa, Vitanda. How Sambad means we want to be defeated by truth. We don't want to defeat any other. There's no second party, anti-party, enemies, but we are sincerely trying to grasp the ultimate conclusions. So when I was thinking after all this coming and go, and after the podcast, I felt one of the symptoms that show we are not yet have reached the maturity of proper Vaishnava conversation is if I feel the necessity to attack the other person, for example, to establish my point, what sometimes is called the argument ad hominem, which means instead of attacking, quote unquote, of dealing with the point, I'm attacking the person presenting the point. So that means still I feel there is an enemy on the other side, someone that I have to defeat. Like one of our chairs will say, weak faith requires an enemy. So sometimes the perception of an enemy implies I don't have enough faith in myself or in my own points to make my own points positively, but I can only make my quote unquote points by criticizing the so-called enemy who has another view. I mean, so-called enemy, only because of having another view. But again, in a real debate, in a real Vaishnava conversation, nobody is to be defeated. Basically, both parties will be winning, and truth will prevail, and both will win because of having accepted truth, of having learned the respective lessons. So, and again, yeah, to engage in real debate, I think that qualification for that is to be willing to hear something we may disagree with, without the need of having to attack the quote-unquote anti-party. We should be willing to hear and deal with that in a gentle way, in a sober way, like the Goswamis themselves did in their books. They were addressing the opposing arguments, Advaita, Vedanta, and other sampradayas and lineages, without the need of demonizing anyone, without getting extremely emotional. And again, instead of doing that, quoting Shastra and presenting their points in a really sober way. I remember when you were having this podcast with Lalita Madhav and Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and how he quoted this interesting point that Bhaktivinoda Thakur in one point mentioned the Bhagavatam was authored by someone with a pen name Vyasa, and then in the second edition of the Krishna Samhita, he kind of updated that and connected that opinion to the scholastics of the time, not so much himself. So Lalit Madhav was presenting this notion that he perceived a form of development of thought in the presentation of the Thakur. Yeah. And that should be the norm for all of us if we want to be part of such a dynamic school and lineage like the Bhaktivinoda Parivar. For me, it's like some form of scandal if sometimes we as members of the Bhaktivinoda Parivar may just limit ourselves to represent such a personality like Bhaktivinoda Thakur by simply limiting ourselves to regurgitating a dogma, sometimes for the sake of institutional chastity. But instead, we should employ our rational faculties in the context of Shastriya Shraddha, or of faith developed on the basis of scripture, with the type of dynamism that someone like Bhaktivinoda Thakur exhibited. Because if not, Vaishnava will be seen in the world and in our own community just as a bunch of whatever, emotionalists, sentimentalists, as they did in the time of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Vaishnavas in the time of Bhaktivinoda Thakur were seen as such a bunch of sentimentalists. Bhaktivinoda Thakur trying to contribute with depth, thought, dynamism. So if we, in the name of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, just let our emotions carry on here and there, the world still may see us in that way. We are not able to dialogue amongst ourselves as Gaudiyas, with each other, as a bunch of fanatics shouting at each other in social media, saying my guru is better than yours, basically.
Right.
So for me, that's creates some form of shame, basically.
Someone was making a point that Gaudiya Vaishnavism is not good for fundamentalists because there's so much gray area when someone's a fundamentalist. I'm not saying that some devotees are fundamentalists. I'm just saying that in general, fundamentalism is like there's only one way and then that's it. But there's so much gray, like you were talking about that last time, about the different hundreds of shades of gray that there are. And I think that has to do a lot with what we're talking about. There's a lot of gray area that we don't, and then we have to be okay with that, I think.
Yeah, but again, that requires certain adhikar or certain eligibility. Not anyone can swim in the gray waters, if you will. And it's okay. We are not to demonize those who can only think in black and white terms.
Yeah.
But nowadays, it's a whole social complex dynamics, because in ancient times, let's say debates were conducted in certain circles where certain people leading the debate with certain adhikar, and everything went on in a relatively gentle, kind way, sober way. But nowadays, social media is just one click, and everyone has a keyboard in front of them and feels the right to share their opinion without maybe thinking too deeply about how much adhikar do I have to share my opinion with the world in extreme way, as I may be doing. No, so Vaishnavism, Gaudiya Vedanta is a very high, refined, and dynamic tradition, and all that can be dangerous, basically, if we do not have the willingness to transcend fundamentalism, to transcend black and white thinking, and enter into the areas of gray. And that requires, again, proper guidance. We may not be Madhyam Bhaktas or progressive Vaishnavas yet in the full sense of the term, but at least we should be guiding our actions and thoughts by someone who is with that standing. That will guarantee that we will be protected, because if that's not there, there's some danger for aparat, there's some danger for fundamentalism applied to other Vaishnavas who just may be thinking differently from me. And I may just be feeling they are enemies, they are against me, they are insulting the whole parivar, and maybe that's not the case. Maybe they are looking for truth, maybe even more sincerely than me. That can happen.
Yeah.
So we should be open for that, because if not, everything ends up being really fundamentally things. And people was telling me also these days, like, okay, you have to go through your guru, you are jumping through your guru and saying what the Goswamis are saying. But I was saying to them, but what if we are speaking in a public debate about this topic to a wide audience that not necessarily are members from the Bhaktivinoda Parivar? You cannot just impose on them what Bhaktivinoda Thakur say, which is so unique about him. We have to be able to dialogue in a more universal realm, basically, with full consensus about certain books and some Shastric consensus. As we quoted, I remember I quoted Srila Prabhupada from Chaitanya Charitamrita, which says, we should accept Guru, Shastra, and Sadhu, but the actual center is Shastra. And if the Guru or the Sadhu do not speak according to Shastra, they are not Guru nor Sadhu. So Shastra is the center for all. And he concludes saying, unfortunately, at the present moment, people do not refer to the Shastras. And we know who Guru is. And of course, I understand that Shastra is known through the Guru at the same time. There is this interdependence. But at the same time, how do I know who is Guru? By Shastra. Shastra describing who is Guru. And Shastra describes the Guru is someone who knows Shastra, who speaks on Shastra. It says, Shrotriyam, Shabdanishnatam, Gyani, all these famous verses in Shastra, in the Gita, Bhagavatam, Mundaka Upanishad. The Guru speaks according to Shastra. So if the Guru is more important than Shastra in every sense of the term, in which sense Prabhupada said here, Shastra is about Guru? So it's important also to, again, a beginner devotee, of course, will need that everything will be explained by the Guru, of course, but a more progressive Vaishnava has the capacity to go to Shastra and to have a criteria and individual sensibilities. And basically, sometimes, because that has been said also these days, someone's tell me, well, what you are telling regarding bhaktis being non-inherent in the Jiva and so on, is not bona fide because you do not learn that under the feet of the pure devotee. So basically, they were telling me my Guru is not a pure devotee. And so the conclusion is you have to surrender to a pure devotee. And of course, the ultimate idea is most probably my Guru is that pure devotee, so you should surrender here. So, of course, one has to learn Shastra from Guru. But if Shastra in a very clear, overt way is saying something, let's say Bhakti is not inherent or whatever, other topic, I don't need a Guru to explain me how actually the Shastra is saying exactly the opposite. No, I mean, if Shastra is saying something very clearly, the Guru will expand on the intricacies of that obvious truth, the Mukhya Vritti, the direct meaning. So we need Guru for further implications of the direct meaning of Shastra. But if the Shastra clearly saying, I don't know, the soul is eternal, it's not that I need a Guru to explain me how the soul is not eternal, because it's not necessary, the Shastra being clear on that. So the Guru will expand on that in detail. And again, all the things that sometimes...
Can you explain that again? I didn't get that point.
Yeah, for example, there is something called Mukhya Vritti and Gauna Vritti. Mukhya Vritti means overt, explicit, clear statements in Shastra about something. Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, whatever. Soul is eternal.
Right.
So the Shastra is clear about that. There's full consensus. I can read Shastra and get that idea. And I need Guru to explain me all the further implications of that clear idea. It's not that the idea is not clear enough and the Guru will explain me in such a way that he will conclude the opposite of what Shastra says. You follow? It's not that the Guru will explain me, actually Krishna is not the Supreme Personality of God. Actually, the soul is not eternal. There's no need for that because the Shastra is being clear.
Oh, I see, yeah.
But we can expand on that idea, of course. So similarly to this, in connection to the topic of bhaktis being non-inherent, Shastra is really being clear and there's some consensus there. But again, some contemporary acharyas at times have said something else. And of course, it's important to include that. I'm not rejecting that. I'm not saying that's deviant. Some may have claimed. I'm just concerned about how to include that, basically, how to include that. And of course, some devotees may have told me in the social media, but Maharaj, are you a Nutan Bhagavata? Do you have prem in your eyes, in your heart? Are you a Sanskrit scholar to determine what is what? The point is, if I will have prem, I will never say I have prem, basically. If I'm in Mahabhagat, I will never say I'm in Mahabhagat. I'm not, of course. And if I'm a real Sanskrit scholar, a humble one, I will never say I'm a real Sanskrit scholar. So this type of questioning of the person who is presenting the argument is some form of dead end, which really do not go to the end of the whole thing, basically. No?
Right.
And something I would like to mention, if we have some brief minutes in this connection also,
please, yeah.
that's something that I already mentioned in the previous lecture, so with the permission of all of you, I may repeat myself briefly, but ideally how to address this type of sambad or healthy conversation in the quest of Siddhanta is to establish first Praman before Prameya, which is the scriptural epistemological source we will use before the topic in itself that wants to be established. So for us as Gaudiyas, as a general as Gaudiyas, not limiting ourselves to one particular lineage, the Srimad Bhagavatam and the books of the Goswamis are our foundational canon, basically. Even the books of the Goswamis are foundational canon about the Bhagavatam, are our Mula Granthas, because why? In one sense, the Bhagavatam is our main book, but we are reading the Bhagavatam through the lens of the Goswamis. We are reading the Bhagavatam through the tikas, the commentaries of the Goswamis. And other Sampradayas will read the Bhagavatam and will find something different. And so these commentaries of the Goswamis, along with the Goswamis on books, are our Bhagavata. That constitutes what we call Gaudiya Vedanta. So it's important to refer in that foundational direction, canonical direction, when we want to set some Siddhantic point in our Sampradaya. And that means to take shelter in Shastra, to nourish our faith. Some complaint has been there these days. I'm mostly addressing the complaints. I won't just tell in detail the nice things people have told me, but that was there also. But some people have told me that I am disturbing the faith of others by bringing these points.
Right.
And you along with me, Namarasa, by inviting me to your show.
Yeah, no, I want to just say that. I mean, people think that you're telling me like, oh, let's do this and let's do that. No, it's been my idea because I appreciate Maharaj's the way he articulates ideas and philosophy, and I think it makes for really good podcasting content. So that's why I invited him. I mean, anyways, yeah, please continue. I just wanted to clarify that.
No problem. So basically, my intention in being here, of course, you are inviting me very gently, and I accept the invitation, hopefully in the spirit of service to the Gaudiya community. It's not my intention to disturb anyone's faith, or to speak, destroy anyone's faith in their own guru, in their own acharya, in their own mission. But when I mentioned that I have found in my own journey a particular acharya or some particular acharya saying different things, I'm just sharing my own trip, if you will, my own journey, my own experience, how I found the things. And I couldn't just like close my eyes like the three monkeys, close my ears and my mouth, but I had to address that and harmonize that somehow or other, trying to invoke the dynamic spirit of our parivar, trying to nourish my faith through that exercise. I know maybe this is not for everyone, and not everyone should be listening this particular podcast, maybe for sure. But this is for some, for sure. And I have received lots of feedback of many devotees who were nourished in their faith by this. And in my personal case, I feel this exercise have really worked very nice. My faith in Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Srila Prabhupada, and our parivar is alive and well. I feel it has been strengthened by this type of exercise. And again, I have nothing against them. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Bhaktivinoda Parivar, Srila Prabhupada, all of them saved my life. I mean, I was a totally conditioned soul, a wild beast in material existence, doing all the nonsense you can imagine. So I owe my life to them. I mean, the worst thing I could do against my own interest will be try to diminish their position in my life or in the life of others. So
can I just reflect back to you what you're saying?
Yes.
You're saying that this exercise of reconciling different things that have been spoken by the acharyas, is your personal journey, and you're sharing that personal journey, and that you don't have any motivation to disturb anyone's faith or to undermine any of our acharyas Prabhupada, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that will be the most contradictory and unbecoming thing I could do
It
for
doesn't
my
make
own
sense.
interest. For my
It doesn't
own
make-
interest.
It doesn't make sense for that you would want to do that even.
Yeah, basically. And on the contrary, I felt that by engaging in this type of exercise, trying to pray, trying to be honest, trying to maintain a steady sadhana in the context of dealing in these waters, I felt that my appreciation for their gift had really increased in my heart. And I feel that some others also see this appreciation being increased in their hearts as well. So, and I know it's complex because for some other people that may not be the case. And that's when we enter this situation where not everything is the same thing for everyone. For someone, something is medicine, something else, the same thing will be poison, if you will, for another person. So I know that some of these topics may be challenging, and I acknowledge that I have inherited somehow from my own Guru Maharaj and Vishnupat Srila Tripurari Maharaj and some other Param Guru Devs like Srila Siddhar Maharaj, some challenging views that try to take us in a hopefully compassionate way from the comfort zone and trying to invite people, starting with myself, thinking from a different angle of view, hopefully all this in the context of Shastra. But my point is, if by quoting Shastra, if by sharing with some people what Shastra says, my faith is disturbed, and if the presentation is trying to be made with logic and common sense and good intention, hopefully, so, and nonetheless my faith is disturbed, then I may question my own self, my own faith. Because if someone quotes Shastra with good intention, common sense, and logic, and that disturbs my faith, maybe I'm responsible of my own disturbance, basically. Because Rupa Goswami says our faith ideally should be Shastriya. Shastriya Shraddha means our faith should be nourished by invoking Shastra. So if by invoking Shastra my faith is not nourished but disturbed, maybe that's showing that my faith is not Shastriya, but Lokika. Lokika means like more sentimental. And I'm not demonizing someone who may be in that situation, but I'm trying to objectively acknowledge that possibility. Because by quoting Shastra, the idea is we are trying to nourish faith. Because faith is to be Shastric, ideally. We have to have faith in what revelation is telling us. But if instead of feeling ourselves nourished, we feel attacked, let's say, that may speak more about where is our faith at the moment, and not so much maybe my intention in speaking. And I don't want to play the victim here. I mean, I'm willing to recognize whatever mistake I may have committed, and I beg my pardon to whoever devotee has been disturbed by any of my words. Again, there is place for being a kanishta, there is place for being a beginner, and to have this lokika shraddha, more emotional faith, but also there is place for that to grow. And these type of dialogues are there for this, are there for those who are in need of growing their faith, basically in the context of shraddha. So I'm sure that some of these topics are not for kanishtas or for certain level of tanishta, but at the same time I acknowledge with social media it's difficult to determine who is on the other side of the screen. So hopefully someone who may be on the Kanishta platform may not feel attacked by hearing me, or if he or she feels attacked, hopefully he may go to his guide who may be, or her guide who may be at least a Madhyam, and the Madhyam may say, no, Padmanabha Swami is not such a demon. He's not that bad guy, basically. But he's speaking some things that this is not the moment to speak now. Like the example we gave of the store, the mother telling to the baby, the store put you in the chimney, and the boy hears another version at school from another boy, and he returns to her mother, this boy is a demon, he told me something different. The mother says, no. We'll speak later about that. It's not the moment now.
Right.
So that's the problem with this type of conversation. Some of them are specifically more directed to the necessity of certain types of practitioners. And that happened in all times. The students were in the Gurukul, student with the guru, with Shastra, with one guru or a few personal exchange. But nowadays you click a link and you are in a talk like this, and maybe hearing topics that may be above one's capacity. So that's why one day we were joking that, okay, next episode, in order to avoid controversy, we'll put only for Madhyams or something.
Something, Maharaj, that doesn't sit well with me is that sometimes I hear the word Kanishta used as like a pejorative.
Yeah, I don't use it like that. As I mentioned, for me, to be a Kanishta is not a crime. all of us have to be Kanishta unless we have been Kanishtas in previous lifetimes. But to be Kanishta is basically to be like a baby Vaishnava. No? So you have some babies, your children. So it's such a charming age. It's a very beautiful moment, but it's not the all in all. I mean, they need so much care. They cannot do too much of their own, basically. You cannot leave a 1-year-old baby having their own life, basically. In 10 minutes, he will be crawling in the midst of the Fifth Avenue in New York or something. So they need like some eye on them. So similarly, but it's beautiful. That age is beautiful. But the point is, if the baby now is a teenager and is 17 years old and goes back to her mother and say, "Ma, can you breastfeed me again? Give me breast milk?" No. The mother will say, "That was beautiful, but it won't be beautiful now. You need to grow now. You need to become more." So it's beautiful to be in kindergarten. It's a very foundational stage, very important one, crucial one, but that's not the all in all. So again, I'm not about demonizing Kanishtas. Actually, I'm about appreciating that stage and taking care of that particular, very fragile section of practice, and how to properly nourish their faith. And as we spoke in the last meeting, sometimes Kanishtas need to take some distance from that certain type of dialogues and may disturb their faith, not because the intention is disturbing or the topic is deviated, but just because it's not the moment yet.
Going along with that same example that you gave of the mother telling the child, "Oh, you came from the stork and down the chimney," what devotees I heard have issues with is that, okay, you might be telling the child, the other boy might be telling the other boy, "Hey, that's not how you came. This is how you came." Why is there a reason to tell the boy that and make that boy maybe lose faith or question the mother when maybe later on in life the mother may or he might come to his conclusion himself? Basically, what I'm saying is that I think what the people I heard on the thread and all this stuff had an issue with was like this preaching tactic argument that Prabhupada and Bhaktivinoda Thakur said certain things because of a preaching tactic. So what would you say to that?
Well, as we spoke,
you've addressed this, but I'd like to hear it again.
Yeah. To begin with, of course, that was not the main point of my presentation. My main point, and of course, the main point of my forthcoming book is about establishing the Siddhanta Bhakti in the Jiva. And I, of course, as you know, I go in the direction Bhakti is not inherent. But, of course, at the same time, the other section is, well, how do I understand some differing opinions mentioned by some of the more contemporary acharyas that seem to contradict that premise, at least at times, not always. Not always. That's the most interesting thing. And of course, I tried to conjecture as much as I could in the best possible way. I do not claim this is the ultimate truth and the last deepest Siddhanta and conclusion in that particular direction. It was a preaching strategy. That was my conjecture and how I tried to solve that. And I tried to harmonize and integrate all the different statements that I found. Because if I over-absolutize what more contemporary acharyas said, that will relativize what the Goswami said in the original texts. No? So that happens as well. So the important point is how to harmonize the two. So I know that the term preaching strategy doesn't sit well. I may consider using some other expression in the future. Because I know that there is very deep ingrained, like even subconscious reactions in us that, okay, they are manipulating us, they are lying to us, they are calculating something, and they are cheating us, and we don't want to be cheated. We came to Krishna consciousness exactly for the opposite reason. So it may sound like a little bit shocking in that connection. But again, as I have tried to explain, there is a place for that in a protective and nourishing place. So going to the example of the stork and the chimney, you may say, well, the boy doesn't need anyone to tell that anything, and he will realize for himself. Who knows? Maybe. Of course, it's an analogy, no? It may be easier to realize about that than to realize something about Siddhanta by yourself. So, and with this, I'm not saying you have to intrude in the life of every single person and impose whatever conclusions you have reached for the benefit of everyone. Again, that's a complex dynamic thing here. I'm not saying everyone needs to, for example, hear my talk I'm having with you now, or our first episode, or even read my book. Maybe for many of them it's not necessary, and I'm not blaming them or forcing them. You have to read my book and agree with me or something.
Yeah.
Some devotees may say, it's not my concern at this point, Maharaj, about this. We say, okay, no problem. But the problem is, of course, I'm speaking here with you, and some of those devotees are connecting by their own volition to the, by their own will to the interview. I may hear things that I'm not trying to impose of them, but I'm just here speaking about them. And again, it's not too much under my control who is on the other side, in particular in these COVID times with social media and so on and so on. So I agree that we do not have to go in the world speaking to every single person about every single aspect of Siddhanta and levels of truth. But also I agree that there is so much need for dialogue and conversation, and so much need for proper conclusions in the case of many devotees, and so much need for learning how to speak about that, as we have seen in the last weeks. There is still a lot of need for developing the capacity of speaking about that. In one point, it goes beyond whether bhakti is inherent or not, or whether the jiva falls or not. It goes beyond that in one point, and it has to do with how much am I willing to learn? How much am I willing to deal with diversity of opinion? How much am I willing to change? Because spiritual life at the end of the day is about change. So sometimes this is the underlying principle that takes the form of this particular topic or the other. But at the end of the day, it has a lot to do with not so much who knows more and who defeats each other, but how much we are willing to continue learning. So
yeah, I mean, I think a huge part of this whole thing, a learning experience for me, has been how to harmonize and how to listen to other devotees that may have different ideas than ourselves, and being okay with that. Like it becomes an issue when our sadachar, when our behavior becomes like offensive and defensive towards other Vaishnavas because they might have a different idea. Like, do we all have to agree on things? Like, we don't. Like, we really don't, I don't think. And the consensus, we don't have to have a consensus, right?
Mm-hmm. Of course, in certain things we need. I mean, we need to have consensus. Again, as I mentioned, Krishna is the Supreme Personality of God. As Gaudiya, certain things we will agree. Certain other things we are trying to agree, at least to begin to speak. And certain other things we must disagree in order to allow for diversity. No, and even if in those things, like these things that we are speaking now, whether bhakti is inherent or not, I mean, I'm not thinking I will convince the whole Gaudiya community about my point. I'm not thinking that, but I'm willing to speak and to learn and to dialogue with people, as you mentioned. Even if I have my own take, stance, opinion on the topic, and I'm convinced about that, it doesn't mean we cannot speak. It doesn't mean I have to become emotional if you disagree with me. And that's a very important exercise, to expose yourself to some diverse opinion and look at yourself, what happened in your blood, if you will, when someone is saying something different from you and it's convinced about that. Do you feel the person is threatening you, is an enemy? Which subjective opinion you are projecting onto the environment? Because a lot of things that happen at that moment has to do with our own situation, not so much with someone else outside. So yes, I agree. We have lots to learn as community, and allowing diversity to nourish us, even if it takes the form of disagreement. There is a place for that, but again, in a gentle way, not in an offensive way, not like promoting enemies and bands and camps and anti-parties and deviants. And I mean, it's easy to go to those sections and to point on victim consciousness, and this is the demon, and let's attack, and so on. So it's a higher challenge to really develop the capacity of disagreeing. As they say, we will agree that we disagree in a proper way.
Yeah. One more point before we get into the actual topic, because we haven't even hit that yet. But there's also the point of if you're part of an organization, a spiritual organization, there's like an accepted stance on something, and that perpetuates as time goes on. For example, like in deity worship, like if deity worship is done a certain way, then that's passed on from person to person to person as time goes on. Same with philosophical explanations on certain things. There may be a certain stance that the society holds that's an accepted stance, and then that perpetuates from person to person in that society. It may be correct, it may not be correct, but what is your viewpoint on that? That an accepted stance is going to be perpetuated, but it may not be correct even sometimes.
Yeah, both things can happen, as you mentioned. So I think it's a healthy exercise to remain willing, open to re-examine, if you will, recalibrate the background of why we do what we are doing. Because if not, we will engage in what Rupa Goswami calls niyama graha, which means to just follow certain things without knowing why you are following. The other one gave me the same stance, and there was some generational copy-paste of how to do something. And it may be correct, but if I do not get the essence of that and the gist of that, it may be not correct. And so there are so many, of course, we are speaking in a general way here, not addressing any specific topic. But the point, let's say you take some philosophical position on some topic in a particular spiritual society, and for decades that is passed on officially, and that seems to work for whatever reason, even though it may be mistaken. And eventually, after some decades or generations, whatever, some other texts come and show there was not the proper understanding. Whatever the case, I'm not speaking about anything in particular.
Yeah.
So the point is, the important thing here is the willingness to re-examine one's understanding, to not be so sure about I'm doing everything perfectly. No, that's sometimes the danger that may like be some form of spiritual bypassing. No, I'm in proper lineage, the most bona fide parampara. I'm receiving everything in the most pure way. So sometimes all these type of notions take me to the idea of there's nothing to be revisited. Everything is perfectly in place, and we just have to continue passing on the model. And I'm not saying that everything in that model is wrong at all. Probably everything mostly is right, but sometimes generation after generation in time, society, people, communication, things may get distorted or may need some update, some relative situations. There are, of course, you have the absolute philosophical principles, but also you have the relative circumstantial adjustments. So sometimes one thing may be confused with the other, and so on. So it's the role of every member of the parampara to contribute by thinking deeply about that. We can be parrots in just parroting something without understanding, or we can be parrots as Sukadev Goswami, like biting the fruit and making it sweeter. So that's what's expected from us as members of the parampara, making that contribution.
Right. Okay, so Maharaj, let's get into the topic today.
Yes.
The fall of the Jiva. So for those of you who don't know, this is a philosophical point regarding how did we end up here in the material world? How did the Jiva end up here in the material world? So myself being a member of ISKCON, the ISKCON official stance, I believe, there was a paper written about this, and the GBC, I think, voted in 1995, I believe, about the stance. And the stance is that we fell from the spiritual world to the material world here. And Prabhupada said that we fell a number of times in conversations or letters, but also in the books, he said that the conclusion is that the Jiva can never fall from Vaikuntha. So let's talk a little bit about that. Your understanding of that point, and then also how to kind of harmonize the apparent contradictions in these statements.
Mm-hmm. So again, we here have another example of apparent contradiction. We are not here promoting Prabhupada is contradicted, Prabhupada doesn't know the Siddhanta, Prabhupada is confusing us. Nobody's saying that.
Yeah.
But we are trying to honestly acknowledge there are different types of statements. So we have to do something with that. As we mentioned, we cannot just cherry pick whatever is more comfortable for us and just forget the other thing. So in this sense, many of the points from our first episode also apply to the criteria to deal with today's topic. But of course, I won't repeat myself in detail. But I imagine most of you have watched that. But if not, you can check that, and many criteria are present there and how to deal with certain apparent contradictions and controversies. So regarding the fall of the Jiva issue, yeah, there is some, if you will, mixed opinion, and we have seen that in the thread. You published the flyer of this meeting some days back, and the podcast already began without my participation some days back, with hundreds of messages in different directions. So that showed that there was some divided notion in this connection.
Yes.
Because Srila Prabhupada seemed to have said both things, and not only in letters. Because sometimes they say, yes, okay, in letters, Prabhupada say we fell from Vaikuntha, but in his books, he said we never fell from Vaikuntha. And while that's mostly the case in quantity of statements, also he has said in his books certain things that lend themselves to be interpreted as we fell. So I have one quote here. With your permission, I may share that with you.
Please,
this is one excerpt from Srila Prabhupada's purport to 4th Canto, 28th chapter, verse 53 from the Srimad Bhagavatam. So he's saying, when the living entities desire to enjoy themselves, they develop a consciousness of duality and come to hate the service of the Lord. In this way, the living entities fall into the material world. When the living entity wants to become Krishna himself or imitate Krishna, he falls down into the material world. By misusing his independence, the living entity falls down from the service of the Lord and takes a position in this material world as an enjoyer. So that seems, I mean, again, he's not maybe directly saying you fell from Vaikuntha, but it lends itself to be interpreted in that way. And as you may know, many devotees have taken this particular purport as well as some others. And these verses from the Bhagavatam in this section as, okay, here we have the Shastric proof that we fell from Vaikuntha, from Golok, from the spiritual world. Now, something important to consider in this section of the Bhagavatam is that this section is an allegorical section. It's not speaking about literally about falling from Vaikuntha. You can prove that by many ways. One, that any other Acharya, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur Goswami, commented on these verses like indicating a possible falling from Vaikuntha or Golok. And at the end of this chapter, the very last verse, verse 65 of this 28th chapter of 4th Canto, after narrating this allegorical story to the king Prachinabarhi, Narad Muni, who is the one speaking here, he concludes in the last verse of this chapter, mentioning the purpose of all this story, allegorical one, was not to indicate that we fell from the Nitya Lila of Bhagavan, but basically to share some analogies in the context of self-realization. So that also puts the whole thing in another context, because as we mentioned...
Who says that?
Narad Muni, last verse of this same chapter in the Bhagavatam.
Okay.
So mentioning all this that I mentioned is not to point we fell from Vaikuntha, but is speaking about, basically, as I mentioned, certain analogies, allegorical notions in the context of self-realization.
Right.
So that's on one side, the so-called section of the Bhagavatam, apart from letters that we know that Prabhupada mentioned to some of his disciples even more explicitly, you fell from Vaikuntha, you were with Krishna, and so on. And of course, we have the other type of statements when Srila Prabhupada very overtly, clearly says, in this case, we don't fall from Vaikuntha. For example, the main part that I will go is the only place in the Bhagavatam where clearly this topic is addressed, which is in the 7th canto and the 1st chapter, 35 verse, and the section where Jai and Vijay are quote-unquote falling from Vaikuntha.
Right.
And at that point, when the narration is taking place, Yudhishthira Maharaj hears, Jai and Vijay fell from Vaikuntha, and he kind of asks Narad Muni, who is from whom he's hearing, how can someone fall from Vaikuntha? He kind of asks in a rhetorical question, like how can someone possibly fall from Vaikuntha? And of course, the reply will be nobody falls from Vaikuntha. And Srila Prabhupada makes that point in his purport to this verse. Let me share that with you. This is the only place in the Bhagavatam when this question is raised. So Prabhupada says, from authoritative sources, it can be discerned that associates of Lord Vishnu who descend from Vaikuntha do not actually fall. Therefore, it is to be understood that when Jai and Vijay descended to this material world, they came because there was something to be done for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Otherwise, it is a fact that no one falls from Vaikuntha. So that's pretty categorical. And there are many other purports. I've done some brief research in the Bhagavatam where Prabhupada says the same thing. In 3.15.48 of the Bhagavatam, he says, "And the abode in the transcendental abode of the Lord never falls." Similarly, 3.16.26 of the Bhagavatam, he says the conclusion is that no one falls from the spiritual world or Vaikuntha planet, for it is the eternal abode. In the Bhagavatam 3.16.29, he says the devotee once accepted by the Lord can never fall down.
Bhagavad Gita, it says, from having once gone to that world, they don't return here again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That place from which, having attained it, one never returns. So basically, Prabhupada made this clear over and over again, and this is the Siddhanta. The Siddhanta for Gaudiya Sampradaya is that no one falls from Vaikuntha, no one falls from Golok, no one falls from the spiritual world. What to speak in our Gaudiya Sampradaya, but even not any other member of other Vaishnava Sampradayas, Sri Sampradaya and Imbarka Sampradaya, none of them accept the doctrine that the soul can fall from Vaikuntha. But today, of course, we want to concentrate in our own Sampradaya. We have enough with our own Sampradaya, what to speak of others. So I would like to share some extra evidence apart from what, of course, Srila Prabhupada has mentioned here. You have quoted one very much two times in the Gita. This comes in Bhagavad Gita 8.21 and in Bhagavad Gita 15.6, almost the same idea. Jat gatvana nivartate tad dhamma paramam mama, or jat kapyana nivartate tad dhamma paramam mama, which refers to Bhagavan's abode as that place from which, having attained it, one never returns. That's the very last sutra of the Vedanta also. Vedanta Sutra ends saying, Anabriti Shabdat, Anabriti Shabdat, which means there is no return from Vaikuntha, basically, because Shabda, because the Shastra says so. The Gita also, I don't know, in 15th chapter, 16th verse, Krishna is speaking about how in the spiritual world, every living entity is called infallible, Akshara. So infallible means there's no possibility of fault. Or in the Bhagavatam 2.9.10, also famous verse. I won't torture you with the Sanskrit, but it says that in that personal abode of Bhagavan, of the Lord, the material modes of ignorance, tamaguna, and passion do not prevail, nor is there any of the influence of goodness, not even sattva guna is there. In other words, there is no predominance, the verse says, of the influence of time. So what to speak of the illusory external energy? It cannot enter that region. In other words, Maya cannot enter Vaikuntha. The gunas cannot enter Vaikuntha. Material time cannot enter Vaikuntha. Therefore, what can make you fall from Vaikuntha apart from the gunas, apart from Maya? So over and over again, it is clear there is no entry point for Maya Shakti into the realm, into the spiritual world.
I remember being taught as a kid that, like in a really kind of simple way to explain, was that we were playing with Krishna. We were with Krishna, and then a thought came in our mind, like of envy or something, and we were like, maybe I want to be Krishna. And at that very moment, we were cast down into this world, and even though we were with Krishna, playing with him, that's like what I was taught as a kid.
As a kid, you say that. You are no longer a kid now, Rasa.
Right.
You need an upgraded version than the stork in the chimney now.
Right.
But that has a role. Again, that has a purpose. That's a good point that you mentioned. I mean, for you, I'm sure it made sense for you. Maybe when you hear that as a kid, it was like, okay, it makes sense, because it's a complex thing to think about origins and all the things. So it's not for everyone, again. So there are some provisional, if you will, versions of the ultimate conclusion that may have some purpose for a certain time. But again, then you are faced with these other statements that you need to do something. You know, the Bhagavatam, for example, 11:29-34, it's saying that someone who attains Vaikuntha attains a transcendental body such as the one that the Lord has. So the point is, if I have a body like Krishna's or Vishnu, similar, and I can fall from there, that means he can fall also, because we have a similar body, basically. We have a similar existence. And again, you mentioned, you became envious of Krishna, but what does it mean became envious of Krishna? Envy means Maya, the gunas. So again, there is no entry point of the gunas.
Right.
So, and again, beyond Bhagavad Gita, beyond Bhagavatam, beyond quote unquote, apart from, especially for us Gaudiyas, as we mentioned before, we have the need to go into the books of the Goswamis where they deal with this topic in a really interesting way. Now, sometimes I know some devotees may say, we don't need the books of the Goswamis, only Srila Prabhupada's books. Everything is there. He gave us everything. And you are right, because Prabhupada gave us the Goswamis. No? And in his books, he pointed to the books of the Goswamis over and over again. The other day I was reading Srila Prabhupada's very first purport to the very first verse, very first chapter, very first canto of the Bhagavatam. And he's saying that within the past 500 years, many erudite scholars and acharyas like Jiva Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Vallabhacharya, even other Sampradaya, and many other distinguished scholars, even after the time of Lord Chaitanya, made elaborate commentaries on the Bhagavatam. And the serious student will do well to attempt to go through them to better relish the transcendental messages. So he's pointing us to these other commentaries. He's saying in the first purport to his whole Bhagavatam.
Like the newest person reading that. I mean, it's right there.
It's there. The point is, are we seeing that or not?
Right.
Because the more we say everything is Prabhupada's book, the more this type of statements get confirmed. For example, also he makes a very interesting emphasis in Srila Jiva Goswami's Satsandarbhas, which I would like to emphasize because he deals there with this topic of where the Jiva is coming from. And Srila Prabhupada calls Srila Jiva Goswami the greatest philosopher of all time, the greatest scholar of Srimad Bhagavatam. And regarding his Sandarbhas, he said that these Sandarbhas are recognized as the most scholarly work in the world. There is no comparison of his philosophical approach to the Vaishnava school. So, I mean, he's saying that in his books. Chaitanya Charitamrita says something similar to the Sandarbha. He said this Sat Sandarbhas is the essence of all scripture. And this word presents the ultimate limit of all Siddhanta concerning Bhagavan. So my point is, all the things are there in Shastra. And when you find this, naturally you will say, okay, I would like to read that book. I mean, it's so special for Prabhupada, so special for Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami. And I heard recently the argument, someone told me, we have only to read whatever Prabhupada translated. If he didn't translate any book, it is because we do not have to read it. No. So I thought, well, that means then that we have to read only to the 13th chapter of the Bhagavatam, because the 10th canto, because Prabhupada was passed away after that.
Yeah.
So it means we don't have to read all the other remaining chapters of the 10th canto, 11th canto, 12th canto, because Prabhupada didn't do it. It's not he didn't do it because he didn't like it. He didn't have time. Krishna called him. And especially what to speak about translating a monumental work like Sat Sandarbha of Jiva Goswami. It's such a big book, and Prabhupada was already engaged in such a big project with the Srimad Bhagavatam. So let me go for a minute to this Sat Sandarbha of Srila Jiva Goswami, because he deals with this topic there in detail. For example, Sat Sandarbha is divided in 6. It's 6 treatises. One of them called Bhagavat Sandarbha. And in chapter 61, the chapters there are called Anuchedas. In chapter 61 of Bhagavat Sandarbha, Srila Jiva Goswami mentions 10 characteristics, 10 attributes of Vaikuntha. And he says the third attribute of Vaikuntha is those who have arrived there never fall. And therefore he mentions nobody falls from Vaikuntha. The 63rd Anucheda of Bhagavat Sandarbha is called no one falls from Vaikuntha. Tatosh Kalanam. One can study, for those who would like to do some detailed research, you can study Anucheda 61 to 70 even. And there's Srila Jiva Goswami, who is our Tattvacharya, important term for us, which means from the 6th Goswami, he especially has been empowered by Mahaprabhu to establish the theology and the Siddhantic conclusions of our Gaudiya Sampradaya. So there Jiva Goswami refers to Vaikuntha as Achyutapada. Achyutapada means place of no fall down. A platform, infallible platform, basically. And there, of course, beyond quoting verses and doing copy-paste with Shastra, also we have to exercise our common sense. So we have to think, okay, if I'm in Vaikuntha or in Golok Vrindavan, that means the platform of pure love, fully inhabited by Swarup Shakti. There's no other influence apart from Prem, the most powerful energy of Bhagavan. So if some devotee falls from the shelter of the Swarup Shakti, it means, and the Swarup Shakti is the most powerful energy of Bhagavan, this implies that there is something more powerful than the Swarup Shakti. But we never hear anywhere that there's something more powerful than the Swarup Shakti. Swarup Shakti is so powerful that it attracts Krishna himself, Sri Krishna Karshini. And the inhabitants of the spiritual world, technically speaking, they do not have love for Krishna. They are made of love for Krishna. They are love of Krishna personified. Sometimes they are called ragatmikas. The whole atma or being is made of raga, love for Krishna. So what can make you fall? So if you are a perfected devotee cannot engage in sin. There is no envy in Golok, just in case. And a perfected devotee cannot engage in aparad. They are not aware of Maya there. I mean, there's no awareness that there is something called Maya Shakti. There's only predominance of Swarup Shakti. Yeah. So if you suggest Maya Shakti can have some influence in a resident of the spiritual world, basically you're saying Swarup Shakti is fallible because they are made of that. And if that is accepted, somehow Vaishnavism becomes reduced to Mayabad, basically, because Mayabad declares what? In among other things, Maya is covering Brahman, and that's what we call Jiva, according to them. So similarly, this idea that we fall from Vaikuntha is, in one sense, with all respect, worse than Mayabad, because it implies a part of the Swarup Shakti, not only Brahman, but Swarup Shakti itself is covered by Maya. And they fell, the eternal associate of whoever. And Srila Jiva Goswami then further states in the Sandarbhas that Bhagavan has a very powerful determination, sankalpa, he took the vow to never abandon his devotees. Remember, and Krishna is Satya Sankalpa. Satya Sankalpa means he whose determination never fails. Right. So how this will fail in him? If we think that we can fall from Vaikuntha, means Krishna is failing in being protective, nourishing, affectionate to his devotees. And then Jiva Goswami quotes the famous verses from the Bhagavatam, chapter 9, chapter 4, verses 63 to 68, starting with the Hambhakta Parad, very beautiful series of 6 verses, where Bhagavan himself in Vaikuntha is telling to Durvasa Muni, you may know the story when he tried to kill Ambarish Maharaj. Right. Bhagavan is saying how much I love my devotees. Hambhakta Parad, Hiyashatantri Vadvijas Sadhuvir Grasthairidayo, and so on. No, I'm totally controlled by my devotees. I don't have the least independence, and so on. So this is Vishnu speaking to Ambarish in Vaikuntha. What to speak of Krishna speaking in Golok about the Brajavasis? Yeah. How much this applies to Vrindavan.
So you're saying that the point that why would Krishna allow that to happen? Like when that thing was spoken to me as a kid, it's like it was like Krishna has no part in that story. It's just like I was thinking something and then it happened. But the reality is that Krishna is so much more involved in the life of his pure devotees and associates that it doesn't make any sense, really.
That's my point. Krishna is generally depicted as an ocean of mercy, even to the conditioned souls. Right. So if he's so merciful to the conditioned soul, how much merciful he is with his own associates in Vaikuntha, if you will. Right. How much attached he is to them, how much they are part of his life and vice versa. Right. So my point is, if we were in Vaikuntha, we fell from there, and he was not able to protect us in that moment from falling. We were serving him lovingly, but somehow became distracted and fell. And he was not able to guarantee protection. Why should we believe in him now and go again there with the risk of falling again or something like that? Yeah. So the idea that actually the very word Vaikuntha means no limits or without anxiety. So try to imagine, according to this doctrine, all of the jivas in every single planet fall from Vaikuntha. So you can imagine a lot of jivas are falling constantly. So and the place is called free from anxiety. Try to imagine being a place where you may be the next falling from Vaikuntha, but the place called without anxiety is kind of ironic, sarcastic even. Right. The place should be called Sakunta, which means the abode of full anxiety, because everyone is falling after the other. Maybe I'm next one. I mean, that's not free from anxiety whatsoever. Right. And the point, even if you want to play out some further philosophical implications, if one devotee attain Vaikuntha, I mean, you cannot, even if you would like to recall your former material experience, you cannot do that because you no longer have a subtle body in which all the samskars, all the impressions are stored.
Right.
Rupa Goswami mentions this in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 1.1.23. He says, Bhakti destroys all varieties of karma, includes your subtle body, gross body, impressions. So that's not possible. And Krishna, going back to Krishna for a moment, as you mentioned, if Krishna's eternal associate fall, that makes Krishna less, because one of the 4 unique attributes of Krishna that Rupa Goswami also mentions that make Krishna unique even above Narayan are Prem Madhurya, Lila Madhurya, and of course Rupa Madhurya and Venu Madhurya. But Prem Madhurya and Lila Madhurya means Krishna has a very unique type of Prem for his devotees. So if Krishna has a unique type of Prem for his devotees that defines him, but those devotees at some point fell, he cannot express that Prem towards those devotees because now they are fallen. So Krishna has become less. That unique quality that made Krishna unique, Prem Madhurya, is no longer operative with that particular devotee because he's no longer in Vaikuntha. Or Lila Madhurya, Krishna has very unique pastimes with his devotees. But if those devotees fall, so Krishna's Lila Madhurya will become affected because those devotees are no longer there. So Krishna himself is becoming less. So this theory is not only making less of Vaikuntha, but of Krishna himself, basically, no? And
Right.
And Rupa Goswami also makes this point when he speaks about different types of jivas. He mentions Nityavadas, Nityasiddhas, Sadhana Siddhas, and Kripa Siddhas. And we can speak about sadhakas ourselves, who are in between, being perfected, not yet, but not longer conditioned souls in every sense of the term. But the point is, according to the list of different types of souls, eternally conditioned, eternally perfected, perfected through practice, perfected through extreme mercy, and the practitioners, according to this list, none of them could have been previously in Golok Vrindavan. Because, again, not a Nityabada, which means always conditioned, not a Nityasiddha, because it means always enlightened, and so on. And I don't want to go into the details. But even if you, for a moment, consider this idea of her, the Nityasiddhas may fall. I mean, what does it imply? Lalita Sakhi may fall at any moment. Jashoda will fall. Purnamasi may fall. If the Nityasiddhas fall, they cannot be called Nityasiddhas after they're falling. Because if they fall from Golok and then they return, they will call Sadhana Siddhas because they return, they attain perfection through practice.
Sadhana. Yeah.
Exactly. So the term Nityasiddha is no longer applicable. And that change also do not fit properly with the permanent eternal atmosphere in Vaikuntha. What Nityasiddha means there's always Nandamaras, there's always Jashoda, there's always Krishna. That cannot be interrupted. The flow of the Lila cannot be interrupted. So in conclusion, basically, the fall of Vaikuntha basically is not mentioned in one single verse in Shastra, overtly. And if we accept the theory, somehow, again, we are accepting that some material concepts like Maya Shakti are infiltrating in Vaikuntha and its inhabitants, Krishna included. And of course, I know there are some arguments, and I don't know if you have some minutes, we can address some of the brief arguments. Sometimes
we have plenty of time, Maharaj.
Or maybe you have some arguments you may like to present.
Well, I wanted to make a few points.
Yeah.
One of them being the so if we didn't fall from Vaikuntha, some Gaudiya Vaishnavas say that we fell from somewhere else.
Yeah. But can I address some arguments related to the last ones related to fall from Vaikuntha before going to somewhere else?
Yes, you can. But also, I want to also discuss. There's a paper that was written about the official ISKCON position. So if you could, after you say what you want to say, I want to kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. No, basically, I was mentioning some devotees may say, okay, but sometimes we are described as fallen. Jiva's fallen in the world. The expression is used here and there.
Right.
And some may say, okay, but if you are falling, it means you have to fall from a non-fallen place, because every other place is already falling in the material world. So it means we fell from Vaikuntha because that's the only non-fallen place you can fall from. So sometimes, again, this is not quoting Shastra, it's just using logic first and then trying to connect with Shastra. But ideally, it should be the opposite. Shastra first, and then we are to apply our logic and common sense. But the point is, it's mostly an expression. I can say, for example, hellish planets. They are a fallen place, but they did not become fallen at one particular point in time. They are falling. There was never a time when hell was not fallen place. You follow? So in the same way, to call hell a fallen place, that not imply that it was not previously fallen, that hell was before Swarga and fell and now became hell or something. Right. So in the same way, we may describe as fallen souls, but actually doesn't mean that necessarily had a beginning. We will speak about that in a while. Of course, sometimes some other arguments, I remember you shared that with me at one point, sharing some ideas, say, well, it doesn't care where we come from, but where are we going to?
Yes.
And on one level, I agree, of course. And I agree that not for everyone, this question is a necessity. Where do we come from and so on?
Like some people might not care. Like they'll be like, it doesn't matter to me. Like, okay, you can turn off the podcast. I mean, it's not if you don't care about it. But some people do care about it.
You are not obliged to continue hearing me speaking and hearing this podcast for sure. Right. But the point is that if you think that we come from Golok, the point is you say, I don't care where I'm coming from, I care where I want to go. But if you think I fell from Golok, means where I want to go is the same place I think I'm coming from. So in that case, that creates some complications because I want to go to a place that supposedly I fell from. So if I fell from, what's the guarantee that I won't fall again? I won't fall again.
Yes.
And things like this. And of course, sometimes also some other. Sometimes I hear also the achintya excuse, if you will. Achintya. Sometimes when you don't know what to say, you will say achintya.
Inconceivable. Yeah.
Achintya. Everything is happening. We fell and we didn't fail at the same time. But the point is, achintya, the term achintya is a very important one, but can be a very dangerous one. Achintya is not to be invoked when trying to do away with something that we cannot understand. No, it's not just like the last resort when I don't know what to say, achintya. But actually, achintya has a lot to do with the process of how to understand everything. Srila Jiva Goswami describes achintya not as something we cannot understand, but as those things that we can only understand by referring to Shastra. If we do not refer to Shastra, certain things will remain achintya. And the only way for them to not be achintya and conceivable is to take shelter in Shastra. And when you go to Shastra, achintya stop being achintya, if you will. So interestingly, that's the main idea of achintya. It's not something that I don't know. It's achintya. But it's I don't know, but Shastra knows. And if we go to Shastra, we'll realize, what's the meaning of Shastra? Some brief words with your permission about Shastra, because an important point for me. Shastra implies to know those things that we cannot know otherwise, basically. Shastra is the absolute itself, God himself extending himself to us, the infinite becoming himself available, knowable to define it ourselves. Shastra represents a comprehensive means of knowing by, as my Guru Maharaj will say, by which we feel there's nothing left to be known. No? Full, comprehensive revelation, satisfaction. So Shastra has this type of style, if you will. You hear something and makes perfect sense, but at the same time, you will have never thought about that by yourself, independently of Shastra. But when you go to Shastra, it's perfectly clear, and it makes perfect sense. So again, our faith, as I mentioned in the beginning, and with this I'm finishing this point, is to be Shastriya. Faith has to be developed in the context of what Shastra is telling. Rupa Goswami also uses the word Shastra Yukti. We have to use our head, my Guru Maharaj will say, to soften our heart. We have to think in order to melt our heart. But do not try to soften your heart without applying your intellect in the context of Shastra. That's the important point. Now, try to use your head to soften your heart, but do not try to soften your heart without using your head in the proper way, in the context of, again, what Shastra is saying. So attaining Siddhanta implies a lot of do with harmonizing, Sangati, reconciliation. If we are not willing to do that, maybe it's not our task, but someone has to do that, because if not, it will be only cherry picking. So the idea of falling from Vaikuntha is is basically not, it's counterintuitive to what Shastra is saying, basically. And
Question.
sorry?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I like that point that you said about Shastra is Bhagavan becoming available to us. But how does that practically work in the sense of we've always been told that, okay, we can't read it, we can't understand everything that's in Shastra. It needs to be explained to us by the self-realized person who, like the book Bhagavat and the person Bhagavat. It's like, so the point that you're saying about that we're getting perfect knowledge from Shastra, but there's that explanation that needs to come toward us. How do we reconcile that from what you're saying?
Well, basically, that's present, of course, for sure. I mean, our tradition in particular is a very ongoing commentatorial. I don't know if that word exists whatsoever.
Well, it exists now.
Of commentaries. And
Right.
That's an important point I wanted to make, that Shastra is saying something, and the sadhu is with his own, her own, sadhvi, with his own life and example. For example, Srila Sridhar Maharaj will say, the newspaper will say, today it will be raining. But if you squeeze the newspaper, water won't come out of that. you need to go out and enter in touch directly with rain. So somehow also the Shastra is pointing, and it's the absolute itself revealing in certain direction, but at the same time, all those ideas and all those truths are becoming fully alive in the person of the sadhus in our lives. So, and that's why this is an interesting point I want to mention, because someone may say, okay, so therefore there are many sadhus and the parampara are contributing with different commentaries. And even though the Shastra originally reveals something, whatever conclusion, there is place for the development of Siddhanta. There is place for that. For example, the 6 Goswamis did not speak clearly, overtly about, for example, Nitya Lila with Mahaprabhu in Nitya Navadvip. But some other members of the Parampara presented that idea after the Goswamis. Actually, I plan to write a second book after the one I'm writing in this connection. Wow. But the point is, there is place for certain development of the Siddhanta, as much as those developments are not contradicting the original Siddhanta. So my point, if the Shastra is saying we don't fall from Vaikuntha, and some Acharya says at some moment we fall from Vaikuntha, that's not the development of Siddhanta, because that opposes Siddhanta. It's not the development of Siddhanta. Of course, with this, I'm not saying that person is deviated. I'm not demonizing anyone. I'm just saying, let's analyze why he or she say that. It's not that because Prabhupada at one point say to someone, we fell from Vaikuntha, from that moment on, some souls started to fall from Vaikuntha because Prabhupada says so. And because before Prabhupada, since nobody said that, nobody was falling from Vaikuntha, but after that, that started to happen. It doesn't work like that. So yes, we see it. For moments Prabhupada say this, but in many other occasions, he very clearly established which is the Siddhanta on this topic. So, of course, I imagine next question may be how to understand what Prabhupada said.
I mean, you were kind of going in circles in the sense of, because we're coming back to that same point. But sometimes I feel like we could take Prabhupada out of the parampara and kind of make it like he made his own philosophy regarding things, when that is actually not true. He was simply coming and revealing or kind of communicating Siddhanta according to the previous acharyas that have always been there, and I think like it's definitely, I feel personally that it's a disservice to pull Prabhupada out of the parampara and say, and in a mood of glorification that, oh, he created his own thing, and it's like divorcing him from the rest of the parampara. And I mean, that's also a contentious topic, but I think it's important to note that, because then we can reconcile all these things. But when you don't do that, and you kind of keep him as the proper, and it doesn't minimize his position. I don't think it minimizes his position. I think it increases his position as being the the pure via media of the parampara and coming to all the Western world and spreading Krishna consciousness all over the world. I think it's a anyway, just wanted to share that.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Prabhupada himself say, my only success is that I never deviated an inch from the instruction of my Guru Maharaj, basically. Over and over again, he said, I'm not giving something new here. My movement is the movement of Bhaktivinoda. He himself linked himself with his Purvacharyas, with his Guru Maharaj, his Param Gurudev, and so on.
Yeah.
So if in the name of glorifying Prabhupada, we reach this type of things, he made his own Sampradaya and Siddhanta, and we don't care for whatever anyone say before or after him or whatever. Yeah, that's in itself is a topic for another episode. But
right.
But
I don't know if I want to do that episode.
yeah, I don't know either.
I'll really get crosshairs on my back. Anyway, yeah, continue, please.
No, I agree with your point. I'm not saying there's bad intention. There may be a really good intention, but pretty naive yet, pretty innocent. So in the name of glorifying Prabhupada, you over-glorify. In one sense, you can never glorify enough someone like Srila Prabhupada. But in another sense, you can over-glorify him by saying things like this. He created his own Siddhanta and Sampradaya. He's so unique, but that's not pleasing to him. When we glorify someone like Srila Prabhupada, we always bear in mind what will give him pleasure. No? So he didn't create anything new. He himself said that no new Siddhanta, no new Sampradaya, but he loyally followed Parampara, which is not less. Again, which is not to speak. Sometimes we may feel the need of making our acharyas ultra, hyper, super unique because our weak faith needs that. But it's not that really the other person needs that. Sometimes in the name of doing that, we are doing a disservice to the other person by, as you mentioned, alienating the person from the whole parampara.
Yeah.
So glorifications have to be expressed in the context of Siddhanta.
Yeah.
So yeah. Sorry.
I wanted to go before you end that point, but I wanted to talk about if we don't fall from Vaikuntha, do we fall from somewhere else?
Yeah. Can I mention two brief words about why Prabhupada say what he said at some moments that we fell from Vaikuntha?
Sure, yeah. And
of course, I don't want to resort to this quote that preaching is strategy again. Let's use some other words like teachable moment or something. Or circumstantial recipe, or you choose the one you like the most. But it's important to do this type of historical, sociological journey and understanding Prabhupada has some urgency in his campaign. I mean, he didn't know how longer he was going to live, and he has some urgency in his message, in his presentation, and he was, in front of a new audience. So he had 2 heart attacks before arriving to West, all these. So in certain topics, complex topics like this one, this is a complex topic. He considered at some moment he really presented Siddhanta, as we mentioned, but sometimes he simplified the presentation, especially speaking specifically to some devotees in morning walks or classes or personal conversations. Because again, the origin of the Jiva or the source of the Jiva is not so easy to digest to the Western DNA, as we will see, because we have in our blood sometimes Christian notions like fall from grace or linear time, not so much thinking in terms of non-beginnings, eternal time, circular time. So in that moment, I personally feel he didn't consider so important to hammer on this particular topic again. And again, he said that Jivas fall from Golok, but also he said they do not. So personally, what I'm trying to do here, resolving this issue similarly to how I solved the fact of non-inherent bhakti. I don't want to go to the previous podcast, but this was similar. I found the 2 things are being said. So how I'm trying to harmonize that in connection to our original Shastra Gurus of the Sampradaya, the Swami have said. So, and I heard some devotees saying, well, but it is more times that Prabhupada say we fell than the ones that he say we didn't fail. No, not in the books, at least, as we have seen, maybe in letters or something. But the point is, it's not about counting how many times the acharyas say one thing or the other, because if we think in those terms, for example, if that's the final proof, how many times he say that, the Bhagavatam says only once Krishna stu Bhagavan Swayam. It's only one line of one verse. But that line of one verse constitutes all the Siddhanta around which the whole Sampradaya is revolving around, the 18,000 verses of the Bhagavatam revolve around, and so on. So it's not about how many times something is being said.
Yeah.
Or sometimes they want to say, Prabhupada used the term back to Godhead, like his motto, you say. So it means we have been there and we have to go back there and so on. But if you know the story of this quote that he used for his famous magazine, also this came from when he took that from a lecture from the Archbishop of Canterbury. Prabhupada himself mentioned this in the very first issue of the Back to Godhead magazine. And here I have what this Archbishop said to understand the context of the quote.
Wow, I didn't know this. This is cool.
Oh, no, you didn't know that?
No.
Oh, okay. This is the quote, and this is the context. The Archbishop is saying, the older people in society have turned away from God, and this is the root cause of all the ills. And therefore, these problems can only be solved if everyone in society turns back to Godhead. So if you understand the context of the quote, it's not speaking about we fell from Vaikuntha.
Like, what? That quote's from the Archbishop of Canterbury?
Yeah. Wow. Prabhupada took it from that, and Prabhupada himself quotes this in the first issue of his Back to Godhead magazine.
Wow.
So the context of the quote is very different to the idea of falling from the spiritual world. It's mostly presenting this notion that in our tradition sometimes we call Bahirmukhya and Antarmukhya. Antarmukhya, like looking at Krishna, and Bahirmukhya, like turning our face away from God. It's mostly a figure of speech only. So it's not to make a whole Siddhanta around that. So I did some ideas I want to share in connection to some things that Prabhupada says in that sense. Right. So if you don't fall from Golok, where do we come from? That's the question now?
Yeah, that's the question now.
Okay. So first I would like to address some other typical theory that is shared in some circles, Gaudiya circles, different from falling from Golok or falling from Vaikuntha. Sometimes it is said that we fall from Brahman or from Brahmajyoti, basically. So what is to be said in this connection? Well, to begin with, there is again not one single verse in Shastra that is stating in a conclusive way that this is going on, that we fall from Brahman, if you will. And if you are to embrace this idea that we fall from Brahman or that we fall from Brahmajyoti at some point in history, and that the soul becomes aware of the sense of individuality in Brahman, and in that moment there is some option to choose between going to spiritual world or going to material world. Sometimes this scenario is depicted. We are in between the two in this effulgence, and we somehow become aware of ourselves, and we have the option to choose to go to Vaikuntha or to come here. And that's when our conditioned life begins. Sometimes this idea is presented, but of course, some questions come if we accept the theory. To begin with, if according to this theory, the Jiva doesn't have any previous experience, nor of the spiritual world, nor of the material world, what is the meaning and the value of that choice? How can I choose among two things that I do not know? Do you imagine? Do you understand? If I don't have a clue about what's spiritual world, material world, and someone tells me, choose among the two, what's the value of the choice? I don't have previous experience or information about that. Or even if some partial knowledge of Krishna and Maya were available to the Jiva at that moment for choosing in that limbo condition, if you will, the question will be, how could the Jiva possibly choose Maya over Krishna if Krishna is all attractive?
Yeah.
No? If you have a glimpse of the two prospects and so on. Or another question that may come is, how can a Jiva from Brahman choose to go to Vaikuntha and enter the spiritual world without bhakti? Because all scriptures say if you want to enter spiritual world, that's through bhakti. So it's not just about saying, I choose there, and you enter Vaikuntha. And also an interesting point is that in Brahman, or Brahmajyoti, actually there is nobody there. Nobody in which sense? There is no sense of individuality. So if there is no sense of individuality, who is choosing what? There is an homogeneous experience there. Because to make a choice implies individuality. But in Brahman, the scriptures say, Brahmajyoti, there is no sense of individuality. So actually, it is just mentioned that there's now a specific geographic area between the spiritual and material worlds called sometimes Brahman, Brahmajyoti, or Tatastha. Sometimes that is depicted as trying to help us like conceptualize something, but it's not some place called Tatastha Loka or Tatastha Shakti, like a line between the two worlds. No? It's an imaginary line, if you will. But Tatastha, when we say Tatastha Jiva or Tatastha Shakti, Tatastha is what the Jiva is constitutionally made of, nothing else. It's not a planet or a place. And the Srimad Bhagavatam, on the other side, defines Brahman or Brahmajyoti as one of the three aspects of the Absolute. Brahmeti, Paramatmeti, Bhagavaniti, Shabdyate. And Jiva Shakti is something different. Sometimes this idea is mixed. Jiva Shakti or Tatastha Shakti is the same as Brahman or Brahmajyoti, but it's not the same. Brahman is one of three features of the Absolute, Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. And Jiva Shakti is one of the different Shaktis of the Absolute. So Brahman is not made of Jiva Shakti or something like this. So Tatastha is not a place, but a Shakti of the Supreme. And that's Jiva Shakti, as we can live under the influence of both Maya Shakti or ideally Swarup Shakti. And there's one more point, if you allow me for a minute in this connection, or you have some question, I don't know.
No. I just wanted to add, if devotees are asking questions in the comment section, if you could please keep it short, because it won't show up completely on the screen. It's like a more practical thing. It won't show up completely on the screen if you if you write a whole paragraph. So if for devotees asking questions in the comment section of this video, please keep it concise. Or if you want to break up your question into different comments, that would really be helpful. Thank you. We'll take questions afterward, but Maharaj, yeah, please continue.
Okay. So interestingly, in this connection, not only the Jiva does not come from Brahman, does not fall from Brahman, but another common misunderstanding, which is not fully connected to today's topic, but is connected, and I would like to clarify. Another idea is that those who attain Brahman, or the Jnanis, will eventually fall from there at some point. Strictly speaking, that won't happen. Brahman, try to understand, Brahman is nirguna, described in Shastra, without the influence of gunas. Therefore, it's not affected by the gunas. It's not affected by Maya Shakti. So it means if you arrive to Brahman, that constitutes a permanent condition of liberation called Sayuja Mukti. That's how it's described in the Bhagavatam, as Mukti. Right. Of course, we as Gaudiya Vaishnavas totally reject that. But that attainment is an eternal one, because it's a mukti. Any type of mukti is eternal. The Bhagavatam describes mukti. Muktir hitanyata rupam. Both gross and subtle bodies disappear. So there's nothing that can make you fall. For example, if you go to Bhagavatam 3:29-13, the five types of mukti are described. Saloka, Samipya, Sarsti, Sarupya, and Ekatva, which is Sayuja mukti. Brahma Sayuja. Again, mukti is defined in the Bhagavatam as a permanent situation, which means there's no fall. In Sayuja mukti, there's no influence of the gunas. In other words, there's no Maya Shakti operative there. So what can make you fall from there if not Maya Shakti? So it's important to understand. Jiva Goswami clearly accepts in his Sandarbhas that Brahman realization, Brahma Sayuja, is an eternal state of mukti. You don't have to come down from that. And you can consult the first 9 Anuchedas of Bhagavad Sandarbha. And I understand there is some sections in the scripture will lend itself to the opposite. For example, famous verse in the Bhagavatam, Aruhya Krichina Paramparam Tada Vimuktamanina, 10-32 in the Bhagavatam, which speaks about those who consider themselves liberated. The expression is Vimuktamanina. Manina means consider themselves to be vimuktas. It doesn't mean they are vimuktas. They are not liberated. They think themselves liberated. So this verse speaks about the jnani who may have attained Jivan Mukta stage, but not yet Videha Mukti. What's this? Videha Mukti means the ultimate liberation after you leave the body. Jivan Mukta means you are still on this body. This body still is the prarabdha karma you have to deal with. So if in that stage you offend bhakti, you commit aparadha to bhakti, you fall. That's the criticism Srila Prabhupada and our acharyas have done to the Mayavadis. Mayavadis are those who want impersonal liberation, but who offend bhakti, considering Bhagavan and its form illusory. But also an important this difference between Mayavadi is that of Brahmavadi. Brahmavadi is someone who wants Brahma Sayuja, but is not offending bhakti. It's just inclined in that particular direction. So that person can attain Brahma Sayuja and not fall from that. There are many sections in the Shastra. For example, Brihad Bhagavatamrita, Sanatana Goswami mentions 207. He says that the Jivan Muktas, he said the Jivan Mukta fixed in Brahman can practice bhakti since they still have bodies. But how can those who have attained liberation practice since they do not have bodies, having merged into Brahman? So he clearly states that point. Baladevi Debhushan, similarly in the Vedanta Sutra, Govinda Bhashya, he mentions that the liberated person can accept one spiritual body, even more than one, or have no body whatsoever. That's Sayuja Mukti. So someone who attains Mukti, Brahman, or another type of Mukti, there is no karma. So if you fall from there, let's say, which type of body you will get? Because body is a product of past karma. So if you fall, and if you fall from Mukti, from Sayuja Mukti, what's the difference between Sayuja Mukti and falling from Swarga, for example? Swarga is something similar. You go there, stay for a while, and fall. So if everyone going to Brahman falls, what's the difference between that and Swarga?
Right.
And yeah, I don't want to.
This is highly technical.
Yeah, sorry, I'm going too much.
No, that's okay. I'm just saying. No, it's fine. I'm just saying it's just like you have to have a certain knowledge of this of the different aspects of what you're speaking about. To put these pieces together.
Yeah, and for me, this idea also that nobody falls from Brahma Sayuja also confirms my point from the first podcast, that is that bhakti is not inherent. Because if bhakti is inherent, if rasa and swarup is inherent, how can I attain Brahma Sayuja and merge into Brahman in a permanent way if there will be a bhakti swarup inside of me? What will happen with that bhakti swarup? That will be frozen or whatever for eternity or something. So that's another way of confirming also the non-inherence of bhakti. And of course, there are some if you have some minutes, there are some brief let's say, arguments against this. Someone may say, okay, the natural state of the Jiva is to serve Krishna, Jivera Sarupai, Krishnera Nityadas. So how can it is possible that the Jiva will stay happy, satisfied in Sayuja Mukti, where there is no conception of serving Bhagavan? And that's a good question. But the point is that a person who arrives at Brahma Sayuja is in this effulgence of Bhagavan, and just remaining within the effulgence is a form of service. Just as if the example sometimes given is, if you decorate a temple with a flower, the flower is doing service, even though it's there in a passive way, if you will. So being within Brahmajyoti is service. Because in one sense, strictly speaking, in Tattva, there is no difference between Krishna and Brahman. Krishna and Brahman are the same absolute. Advai Gyan Tattva says about a non-dual consciousness. Or one can say the potential of the Jiva, or the Swarup of the Jiva, has the potential to do seva, but in Brahma Sayuja is not doing seva. Basically, it's like if you have a servant who is sleeping. Some analogy sometimes may be required. So if the servant is sleeping, you won't say, oh, he's not a servant because he's not doing seva. He's sleeping, but his identity or his potential identity is still that of the servant. And so in our conditioned state also, we may not serve, but our sarup, our nature, ultimately is das. And of course, someone will say, yes, okay, Maharaj, but of course, just to make it clear, I'm not promoting Brahma Sayuja. No, for us as Gaudiya Vaishnavas, for example, Prabhupada Sarasvati say, Kaibalyam Narakayate. No, this Brahma Sayuja is like worse than hell. But of course, we consider it worse than hell from our subjective perspective of what we have received in Bhakti. Because for us, the bliss of seva is not in such a mukti. There's only a type of ananda in Brahman called Brahmananda. There is not Bhakti-ananda, Premananda. But again, for someone, for whatever reason, past samskars, association, is attracted in the direction of Brahman. Again, Brahman, what's Brahman? Brahman is the all-pervading aspect of God. So the only way you can realize it is through the perception of non-distinction from it. Because if you perceive yourself to be distinct from Brahman, you cannot have full realization of Brahman, because that contradicts the very nature of Brahman, which is all-pervading.
Yeah.
But of course, for us, someone who obtains Brahma Sayuja doesn't mean that became Brahman in every single sense, like the followers of Sankaracharya say. So, okay, yeah, for us, Brahma Sayuja is spiritual suicide, for sure. And for us, not for them, for us. And why some people commit suicide? Well, for a normal person, it doesn't make sense to commit suicide. But when you are frustrated, you choose to kill yourself generally. So similarly, some people decide to attain Brahma Sayuja, being frustrated with material suffering and being ignorant of the bliss of bhakti. So for them, it's understandable, and they will feel this is perfect for me. So again, the conclusion is nobody falls from Vaikuntha and Golok, and nobody falls from Brahman originally, nor initially, but nobody falls from Brahman after having gone there as well. So also that particular theory is not the ultimate conclusion, basically.
So then where did we fall from?
Yeah, that's a good question. I will say better to reframe the question and to ask, have we fell from anywhere at some point, actually?
Right. Good question.
The answer goes more in that direction. Actually, the reply to this is that we don't fall from anywhere, strictly speaking. But as the Srimad Bhagavatam describes, 11.11.7, you can find, and Rupa Goswami uses the same term, Nitya Bada. So Nitya Bada means eternally conditioned. Of course, eternally conditioned doesn't mean eternally from here to the future, because we are not followers of Madhvacharya in every sense of the term. He has this idea in mind. There are some eternally damned jivas for eternity. That's not for us our Siddhanta.
Also a Judeo-Christian conception, isn't it? Like internal damnation.
But Nityabada means we are conditioned without the beginning. In other words, the term that sometimes it uses anadi. Anadi means without beginning. Anadi karma. This is the reply of Mahaprabhu himself. You can find this expression along our Shastra. Yeah. When Sanatana Goswami is being instructed by Mahaprabhu, and he asks to Mahaprabhu, who I am, basically. Mahaprabhu replies, Krishna Boli say Jiva Anadi Bahirmukh.
Yeah.
You know the section. So Anadi Bahirmukh, they will have the quote Bahirmukh, turning our face from Bhagavan from time without beginning. That's the situation of the Jiva having forgotten Krishna without a beginning point. And this is clearly mentioned everywhere in Shastra. In Vedanta Sutra, for example, 2.135, it's clearly established that karma is anadi. In that section, Vedanta Sutra is trying to show God is impartial. This is an important point because so many other things come in the way here, and we may start to wonder why Krishna is like this, allows this to happen, and so on. So someone may ask, why in the world we see so much inequality? So that may point to God not being impartial. So the Vedanta Sutra say, no, it's not like that. Every person is experiencing whatever they are experiencing because of their past actions. So the next question in the Vedanta Sutra itself says, well, but when everything began, every jiva then started from an unequal situation. And that's when the Vedanta Sutra said no, because karma is anadi. An end of the conversation, basically, for the Vedanta Sutra. So basically say, if you say that the theory of karma cannot explain the inequality in the world, because someone again may say, everyone had the same karma in the beginning, Vedanta Sutra say, there is no beginning. There's no beginning to the world, and there's no beginning to the souls. And again, this is complex because for our head to think in terms of no beginning, some smoke starts to come. So I understand why some acharyas didn't enter into the details of this. It's complex.
Right.
But for example, you go to the Srimad Bhagavatam and make some counting, and at least 20 times the Bhagavatam uses this term anadi. Now, if someone is interested in knowing all these detailed quotes, I can share later in the thread and so on. They can ask me. So anadi avidya, anadi this, anadi without beginning. Even in our Mola Granthas, the books of the Goswami, also in Paramatma Sandarbha 47, Jiva Goswami speaks about two types of jivas, eternally conditioned and the liberated ones. And Sanskrit, as we spoke in the last episodes, Sanskrit is not lacking in specific terms and expressions for expressing every single thing. And Jiva Goswami is someone who knew very well all these terms. But every time he spoke about the conditioning of the jiva, he always used this same term, which is anadi. Interestingly, anadi also comes in the Bhagavad Gita. In chapter 13, verse 20, there it is said that, let me read the verse. Primordial nature and the living beings should both be understood to be beginningless, anadi. Their transformations and the modes of nature are products of material nature. And interestingly, in the purport of this verse, Srila Prabhupada gives straightforward Siddhanta in this connection. He says, material nature was absorbed in the personality of Godhead, Mahavishnu, and when it was required, it was manifested by the agency of the Mahatattva. Similarly, the living entities are also in him, and because they are conditioned, they are averse to serving the Supreme Lord. Thus, they are not allowed to enter into the spiritual sky. But with the coming forth of material nature, these living entities are again given a chance to act in the material world and prepare themselves to enter into the spiritual world. That is the mystery of this material creation.
The way I see it is that it's like explaining to an ant, like what a cell phone or something is. Like it's like we can't understand what anadi is because our everything is so like linear and like according to our senses and things like that. So I feel like it's okay. I feel okay just being like, I don't understand. I can't conceive of it because it's just something beyond my little brain can conceive,
Yeah, I get the point. And I understand why, again, many of our acharyas have not gone into the ultimate detail because that can create some problems for many. But at the same time, again, our brain, not only yours, mine as well, and most of us in connection to these topics, every brain is small in connection to things that go beyond the brain, like no beginnings. But at the same time, Revelation, Shastra, is sharing these notions, and our acharyas have commented in this direction. Prabhupada, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, all of them in this connection agree with this idea that the Nityabada Jivas come from Mahavishnu. And come, when I say come, it doesn't mean in one beginning point in time. But Mahavishnu is the aspect of Bhagavan that deals with the Srishti Leela of the material creation.
Yeah.
For example, in the purport to this verse of the Gita, 13:20, both Baladev Vidyabhushan and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur say the same point. Say, the jivas are anadi, without beginning. Material nature is anadi, without beginning. The union between the two, therefore, is anadi, without beginning.
Wow.
The union between the two is karma. Karma is like the glue that binds jivas with material nature, if you will. The connection between Maya Shakti and Jiva Shakti is karma. And since Maya Shakti and Jiva Shakti is anadi, therefore the link between the two is anadi again. Anadi, without beginning.
Yeah.
So, but again, Mahavishnu is the deity in charge of this world. Mahavishnu becomes Paramatma. I don't want to complicate too much things, but that's what's described in Shastra. And from Paramatma, the Bada Jivas expand. This is declared in the very first verse of Bhakti Sandarbha. Jiva Goswami says, Paramatma Vaibhav. The living entities are expansions of the Shakti of Paramatma. So at the end of every creational cycle, when all the material world is in an unmanifest condition, between creations, you know that there are these creation cycles, sometimes compared with the breathing of Mahavishnu and so on. But in between each creation cycle, the material world becomes unmanifest. So the Bada Jivas that were in that particular universe enter Mahavishnu and stop being aware of their own individuality in a state called susupti, or deep sleep, basically. So until a new creative cycle reactivates along with the karma of each jiva and their sense of individuality, basically. So that's the situation, this homogeneity, if you will, in susupti, Interestingly, the experience of Brahma Sayuja that we described before and the experience of in Susupti in between creative cycles is quite similar, subjectively speaking. And that's why sometimes some contemporary acharyas have used the term Brahman when describing Susupti with regard to the movement of the Tatastha Jiva from homogeneity to heterogeneity. Sorry for so many complex topic terms, but
Okay.
in Shastra, this is like this. This Susupti or dreamless sleep is also compared to Brahman sometimes. But the point is that Susupti or this deep sleep between creative cycles is an homogeneity, a lack of individuality, awareness of individuality that does not endure. It just endures for a time, in which karma is temporarily suspended, but not fully eradicated. When you go to Brahma Sayuja, karma is totally fully eradicated. So again, this coming and going of the Anadi Bada Jivas or Nitya Bada Jivas from Susupti and out of Susupti and in of Susupti and out of Susupti has no beginning any more than Mahavishnu himself has no beginning. So yes, sometimes some contemporary acharyas have tried to give a more rational explanation to this phenomenon, more according to our Western sensibilities. We felt from someone, we came from someone. Because again, we are facing a Western audience, but at the same time, I don't know, Bhaktivinoda Thakur himself spoke about Anadi Karma. He has a very famous song, Anadi Karma Phale. In his commentary to Brahma Samhita, he speaks in terms of Anadi. And also, I know that at some point someone may say, okay, I don't have a problem with Anadi, but sometimes Anadi has been translated as from time immemorial. And sometimes the idea of time immemorial for some is it's long time ago, but it started at some point. But strictly speaking, Anadi doesn't mean that. Anadi means no Adi. Adi means beginning, Anadi means no beginning. I know that sometimes Srila Prabhupada translated Anadi as from time immemorial, which seems to indicate there was a beginning, but beyond one's remembrance, if you will.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting to note that Srila Prabhupada, when he used the term immemorial, he actually refers to a time that is not existing actually. It's not referring to a time that is beyond my scope, but that has never existed. For example, if you study his purport to verse 118, 20th chapter of Madhya Lila of Chaitanya Charitamrita, he speaks about the Nitya Muktas. Nitya Mukta means what? Eternally liberated souls. And he described there's devotees from time immemorial.
That doesn't mean, it doesn't mean that it was a beginning. It was
exactly. Forever they are devotees. No?
Right.
I mean, Sri Radha, Yashodananda, all of them are devotees from time immemorial. But it doesn't mean that they began, but we cannot remember when that began. They began to be Yashoda or something.
Right.
So it's important to understand what's the intention of the author when using the expression. So in this way, Anadi doesn't mean time immemorial, but time without beginning, beginningless time. In the same way that Adi means beginning. Adi doesn't mean something in the scope of my memory. Adi means beginning, and Anadi means no beginning. So yes, I know that this is a complex topic, and I understand why sometimes this was simplified.
Right. There's a quote that Prabhupada usually quoted from, I think it's from Prema Vivarta Jagadananda Pandit, I think. He says, Krishna Bulia Jeev Bhagavan Kare Pasate Mayatare Japatiya Dare. Krishna Bulia Jeev, meaning they forget Krishna. So doesn't that mean that something forgetful means that you knew it beforehand?
No, it's the same what Mahaprabhu said to Sanatana Goswami. Krishna Boli say Jiva Anadi Bahirmo.
Oh, right.
So Krishna Boli means forgotten Krishna. When? Anadi, time without beginning.
Right. Okay.
So again, it's a way of how we use language and how we tend to understand certain expressions, basically.
Yeah. Mark, with your permission, if we could go into the comment section.
Yeah. I have some further ideas, but we can go, yeah.
So there's a lot of discussion and a lot of like big chunks of text that I can't read right now.
Okay, I will try eventually to take the time to hopefully reply to all of them in case we are not able to address all of them, just in case.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna go down to see what questions I can take that are kind of short and concise.
Okay.
Can you see the comments also?
No,
Oh, okay.
I'm not in Facebook.
Oh, right. Okay. Let's see. Okay, here's what. Oh, I think you. Okay, you already answered this. This is from my friend Karuna Sindhu. So, this was regarding the quote by the Archbishop of Canterbury that Prabhupada said himself that.
Yeah, that was already addressed, I will say. Maybe that question was before I clarified that.
Okay, here's another thing. Srila Gaura Govinda Maharaj has written that Vaikuntha can refer to a planet in the material world in regards to this debate. Does Maharaj have any further thought on this? I've struggled to see how this reconciles issues. Thank you so much for this great discussion. I haven't ever read that before.
Yeah, I haven't either read that even, but I would like to, personally, I would like to really be more informed in detail about what Srila Gaura Govinda Maharaj said in which context to address the question properly, because I wouldn't like just to speak without knowing the details. So if possible, I may contact Tilak Gragar personally and get the background. But of course, if we are to take Vaikuntha as a material planet, of course, we can speak in terms of falling. But of course, the main point remains the same, that if we take Vaikuntha as a transcendental realm, there's no fall from there.
Okay. Maybe we could have a conversation about Maya. It is so much related to this subject. There's a story about Narada asking Krishna if he can experience Krishna's Maya. Interesting question.
Yeah, that's a whole that's a whole different episode. Dedicated to Maya Shakti, but it deserves so for sure. Maya Shakti is really a very important reality for us to understand. The Bhagavatam himself would say, Mayam Varnaya Tunusya Isvarasya Numodata Shrambata Shradayanityam Mayayatmana Muhyati. That but by properly discussing about Maya Shakti, by properly understanding the controller of Maya Shakti, of course, as well, and understanding Maya as the Shakti of Bhagavan, by permanently speaking about Maya Kata, we will transcend Maya, the Bhagavatam says. So how to transcend Maya? By describing Maya in connection to its source. So of course that Maya is a very interesting reality, interesting concept that also sometimes I've seen devotees kind of project some Christian sensibilities in the direction of Maya being a bad-intentioned personality that wants us to fall and suffer, and it's against Krishna, but actually it's
a devil or something.
Yeah, but it's actually a Shakti of Bhagavan that is in his service. The Bhagavatam describes her as being ashamed of having to perform that particular function, but someone has to do it. Because again, can I mention some point in connection to this? Because someone may ask, well, but if Maya is there, why Krishna made all that like this? If there's no beginning, for some people this sounds cruel. Like we have been thrown here forever without choice, and this kind of creates may affect our faith as well. Someone ask why Krishna did like that. There's a whole department in philosophy called theodicy actually that deals with this question, that if God is good, why there is bad? Of course, we in our tradition do not speak too much about bad or evil or demon, but Maya Shakti, Avidya, Anadya Vidya. And for example, if a person doesn't know Sanskrit, his ignorance of Sanskrit is without a beginning, basically. So that's the same idea here. And why we are in Anadya Vidya? In one sense, there is no why, because there's no beginning. There has no beginning to us and to the world. So, I mean, let's try to understand this point, if you give me 1 minute. It's because sometimes we, again, carry this Christian sensibility of creatio ex nihilo, which means creation out of nothing. But in Gaudiya Sampradaya, we are not thinking Krishna created something out of nothing, but everything exists without a beginning. Krishna exists eternally, and his Shaktis exist eternally. Maya Shakti exists eternally, Sarup Shakti exists eternally, and us, Jiva Shakti, exists eternally. So, and I know this has a lot to do with, so who is to blame then? Because generally we want someone to blame. But how God is not to blame for the suffering of the jivas, because karma is anadi. God did not create the world with evil in it. Try to understand this. I mean, the world always existed with Krishna, along with God, with his energies. The interaction with his Shaktis existed. Karma is anadi because Krishna is anadi. The Srishti Lila, this world is anadi. This lila involves karma, the principle of justice. And Krishna defers to justice in general in this world as Paramatma. Because if not, he will be unjust. But also at the same time, he's merciful, which is a transgression of justice in the context of bestowing bhakti. So without the principle of karma, there will be no mercy, because mercy is a transgression of karma. And if Bhagavan has no mercy, he will not be worthy of the highest regard. So God, the conclusion is God is not to be judged by what he makes. Why he made the world, he didn't make the world. Why he made us, he didn't make us. So he did not make anything. So he's not to be judged by what he makes, but rather by how he behaves in relation to what already is there. So there's another way of thinking about it.
Wow. Very interesting.
Do you follow my point?
I do, yeah.
So Krishna is not creating anything. Everything exists eternally along with him. So we are to consider him about how he behaves with all the things that already are there.
Yes,
So,
I see what you're saying.
So karma is an adi, therefore it was never imposed on us at any point in time. So in this way, we cannot say that God basically caused us to be in a suffering condition, because we have been there without a beginning, but we can choose something else at any moment.
Right.
And at the same time, again, we have not made a choice that caused us to fall from grace. And until we come in contact with the sadhu, as explained in the other podcast, there is no way for us to embrace the path of bhakti, which is not inherent. Therefore, the point is the conditioned soul is not to blame for the suffering, and God is not to blame for the suffering in the world. So the whole concept of blame basically is simply null and void. It is simply what it is. Sometimes we want to blame someone. It's interesting how this operates in our subconscious regarding blame. Some jivas maybe are serving Krishna from time without beginning, Jashodananda. We don't say anything. But if someone says there's jivas who are not serving Krishna from time without beginning, then the question comes, why? Because many times we want to blame someone to obtain some mental satisfaction.
Yeah.
But real solution will be look at solution to suffering, basically. So the fault finding or blaming propensity, with this I'm finishing, and we continue with the question, is basically an expression of illusory life, basically. But as we grow spiritually, proportionately our inclination to find fault will disintegrate, I will say, and will be replaced by a growing sense of compassion. And if there's no one to blame, no fault, everything is perfect, and there's always room for improvement, basically. As Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta say, the only lacking is the lack of Krishna consciousness. So that can always increase, basically.
Yeah. I see a theme here in some of the questions that says, what about when Prabhupada said that we were all Brahma? So here's a question. How do we understand the declaration of Srila Sridhar Maharaj when he said the first body of the Jiva is the body of Brahma? I haven't read that, but...
Yeah, sometimes that's been stated. Of course, this is not to mean that we begin, again, because there's no beginning. It's not that we fall and first we are someone and then we become someone else and someone else. But what is mentioned in the Bhagavatam is that after, or I will say, before one official creative cycle, Brahma, there's one form of Brahma called Hiranyagarbha, which somehow the Bhagavatam this represents that as a conglomerate of all the jivas. So all the jivas that will eventually become aware of their individuality in the new creative cycle are represented in this original form of Brahma. It's in that sense that some of our acharyas have said the jivas originally first were Brahma, not because there was some falling from one place and some chronological degeneration of species or something, but when every single creative cycle begins, there's this particular form of Brahma called Hiranyagarbha. You can search, I had to search for the exact quote in the Bhagavad, where all the jivas are conglomerate there before reobtaining, if you will, their sense of individuality when their karma activates again.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty technical topic.
Yes. Very technical. Okay, here's a question. Rajanath, I think this is a quote from Jiva Dharma. You said earlier that the chit world is eternal and so are the jivas. If this is true, how can an eternal entity possibly be created, manifested, or produced? If it is created at some point of time, it must have been non-existent before that. So how can we accept that it is eternal, Babaji. The time and space that you experience in this material world are completely different. Oh, I thought this was a question. I'm sorry. I read it as a question for some reason. Okay, here. If I'm not remembering back my Swarup and I have to develop bhakti, it is not inherent, then how do I know what seed I got? When I understand it and what it is indicated by your an acharya, your guru, sampradaya, or my tastes, but I have to get tastes in the first place. A few questions there within
Okay.
that. Let's.
Well, I'm trying to follow the question, sorry.
Yeah.
How do you know what seed you got? Well, of course, in the very beginning, you may not have an idea of what seed you got, because if this is our first lifetime of contact with sadhu sangha, we may not have any overt devotional specific affinity, but the seed is coming, as the verse saying, Guru Krishna Prasadipai Bhakti Lata Beach. And eventually, as Mahaprabhu gives this whole analogy of the vine, the seed is planted and it's watered, and all these different ingredients start to evolve, if you will, and eventually the leaves come, and eventually the flowers come, and eventually the fruit comes. So the more this vine, to continue with the analogy, grows, the more you find yourself with some spiritual affinity, basically. In the beginning, our spiritual practice may be more generic. That's another big topic altogether, like when we may speak about becoming Krishna conscious, but that's still a general idea. What specific form it takes as much as we develop. So we will find ourselves attracted in one direction or another. And of course, that's generally because of the bhakti samskars we receive by sadhu sangha in this lifetime or previous lifetimes, maybe. That can happen also. That can happen. In this lifetime, you may receive a particular devotional impression from your Gurudev, but maybe in your previous lifetime, you were already practicing and you received another types of samskars that were so strong that created some particular affinity in you in your previous lifetime. And in this lifetime, you received association with the sadhu with another affinity, but you have so deeply embedded samskar from previous lifetime that association in this lifetime won't change that affinity you already developed, but will nourish that. It shouldn't be a conflict, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So that in time will evolve. The more our practice evolves, naturally, as Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur describes the stages in bhakti, naturally will be described having a more and more clear sense of affinity in one direction or the other.
Okay. Let's take another question. How do we understand the creation of jivas in the world through Swayambhuva Manu with the concept of anadi?
Well, basically, it's not so much creation of jivas per se, but it has more to do with the different manifestation of species, of bodies, not so much the creation of the jiva. The jiva is not created. The jiva is consciousness, spirit. So you don't create a soul, basically. So when the creation of the manus and all this type of progenitors and prajapatis are described, it has more to do with the population of the world, like like manifesting different forms. Brahma himself asking his different sons, as we know how the Bhagavatam describes, to populate the world, and different species are there. So it has more to do with the different species rather than the with the souls in itself. So of course, again, each one of those souls that will appear in each one of those species are not beginning in that particular lifetime. That particular jiva came from a previous cycle with certain karma, and according to that karma from the previous cycle, in this particular cycle, they will appear in whatever given species they have to be according to their karma, basically.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Is there certain personalities that would never fall from Vaikuntha, but then possibly other spirit souls or personalities who have the ability or propensity to enter into the material universe? And is being in the material universe, in an obscure sense, a type of service as well, as we are acting out or a part of Mahavishnu's dreaming of the material worlds? I don't know if you understand that, but I certainly don't.
I think so. Let's try. Certain jivas that never fall from Vaikuntha. Well, I will say it again, that nobody falls from Vaikuntha. And if someone comes from Vaikuntha, it's not a fall, like Jai and Vijay. They came to on earth, but it's not a fall, technically speaking. Strictly speaking, Krishna himself is manifesting his Leela on earth at every single moment. Our acharyas are explaining. In one planet Earth, and in some universe, Krishna is always performing his Nara Leela. So strictly speaking, he's always in one form on earth, but it's not a falling state. And whenever Krishna is, all his associates are with him. So that's, of course, a complex thing to understand, because at the same time we hear Krishna is in the spiritual world with his associates eternally, but he's always executing his Leela on earth, always, at some part, eternally. But it's not that the spiritual world is empty and there is some sign saying, we went to planet Earth, we are coming back in a few decades or something. They are in different manifestations simultaneously. But again, they're not falling from there on earth. They are coming to perform Leela. So that's a particular type of Leela. The Nitya Siddhas, along with Bhagavan, they engage in a particular Leela. And for us, as Bada Jivas, we are not eternal associates of Bhagavan. So we are part of the Shristi Leela. That's the term that has been used. Shristi means like creation. So yeah, it still is a Leela because it has to do with the Bhagavan and the interaction of Bhagavan with his Shaktis. And of course, the ultimate glory of the Shristi Leela is when the Jiva enters in touch with Bhakti and becomes aware of its ultimate prospect. So somehow or other, being in the Shristi Leela is a type of service as much as we are aware that we are in the Shristi Leela, basically. Because that's glorious in itself. But as much as we are not aware where we are and what's the purpose of all this, it's most a disservice to ourselves and our source, basically. Right. So I hope it helps.
Dandavata Maharaj, what is the point to delve into such topics, such as fall from or not from Vaikuntha? How will this help one in their sadhana? Good question.
Yeah. At as we mentioned, it doesn't necessarily have to be a topic that every single practitioner has to hear at this precise moment. So again, many of you who are here in this podcast may need to log off from the
or it's my fault. I'll take the blame for that one, because this is the number one Hare Krishna podcast and this is what we're discussing. So that's why we're delving into it, because I wanted to. But yeah, some people don't need to listen to this, right?
So I will like to make that point first clear. I'm not just in a campaign. Everyone absolutely needs to hear that. And if you are Bhakta Joe, newcomer from day one yesterday, you have to know the truth about where the soul is coming. I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
But in some level, I've seen many devotees having their faith disturbed by this idea of falling from Vaikuntha, because this didn't make sense in many ways regarding, again, Krishna's nature, the nature of the spiritual world, the nature of bhakti and prem. How can you fall from that? And so many contradictions that at some point for some devotees may become something necessary to address and solve. So again, this type of words is mostly directed in that connection. Because again, we are speaking about, we want to go to a place. All of us agree. We have a common goal, Golok Vrindavan in our tradition mostly. And but if we say we are coming from there, naturally that creates some complexity there. Because as we say before, I want to go to a place that they are telling me I have fallen from. So what guarantees me that I'm not going again and it won't fall again? Krishna won't be able to protect me. Is he able to protect me? How much he loves his devotees? All Krishna's love and mercy becomes like question if you play out the implications of this notion. So again, for some devotees, that's necessary to speak about. From some others, may not, no problem.
Okay, so I think Leela Vilasini is clarifying her question because we didn't answer. She didn't think we understood it. There are different seeds you get. Who decides? Is it by chance? Just one gets seed, okay, bhakti, another of impersonal inclination to end up in Sayuji Mukti? That was my question. I think you didn't understand.
Oh, probably, yeah, I didn't understand. So bhakti moves independently. That's described in Madhurya Kadambini by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Bhakti has its own initiative, if you will. And of course, it's up to us to know what to do with that seed that is coming through our way, because sadhu sangha can come to our life, but we can choose to offend the sadhus or host the seed they are trying to give us or not, basically. No? So there are some different inclinations, but generally, again, bhakti will come out of its own will, out of its own sweet will. Now, we have our own will. Sometimes we speak about in terms of free will. It's not that free as well, of course, but we have some will, but also the sadhus have their own will. So it may not be in our will to become a Gaudiya Vaishnava. At least in my case, it was not my conscious decision before meeting the devotees, I will become a Gaudiya Vaishnava. But at one point, I found myself singing and jumping and dancing in the kirtan and saying, what I'm doing here, how I came here. So it was not my official decision, but it was the will of the Vaishnavas exercising in relation to me. And that touched my heart, and here I am. And it is said in the scribe also, I can share with you, I don't remember the exact verse now, but in connection to impersonal liberation, of course, that's not bhakti in itself. So there is another types of samskar that receive mukti samskar in connection to jnanis. But bhakti is also an influence that is in the world, always operative. So some people may choose bhakti, some people may choose some other idea, but still we have our particular volition, if you will to exercise in connection with one or the other. It's not like an artificial imposition that you don't have any decision whatsoever. So some ideas, we can continue speaking for sure.
Yeah, we're running out of time here, but I'm just going to pick some questions. This is from my friend, so I'm going to take this. Hare Krishna Maharaj, my previous question was posted before you addressed it on your talk. This was about Back to Godhead. The next question is, can you explain a little bit more about Sarup Siddhi? How do you attain your original form when you are Anadi and Nityabada? Good question.
Okay, so Sarup Siddhi, it's a term that is mostly used by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He has termed Sarup Siddhi and also Vastu Siddhi. So generally the idea of Sarup Siddhi has to do with attaining the perfection of our Swarup, which in this case will be attaining the perfection of our spiritual identity. And generally this is connected with being born in the whatever Krishna Lila is being performed on planet Earth. There's one birth, we have to go through that. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains in his Raga Varma Chandrika. And after that birth, we are taken in the Krishna Lila on earth, whatever Krishna is, and we receive some scar from eternal associate from day one, from the womb. After that birth, we enter into Golok Vrindavan, that's called Vastu Siddhi. So that's the first part, regarding Swarup Siddhi. Swarup Siddhi, again, has to do with being established in our eternal identity, and Vastu Siddhi represents the ultimate concrete perfection of that when we enter the Aprakat Lila Golok Vrindavan. So the last question is, how do you attain your original form when you are Anadi and Nityavada? So again, I'm not sure if the term original form in your case implies the notion that that form is already there in us. But if that's the case, you maybe have not seen the first episode. But if not, you may know that personally, I share the notion that according to Shastra, there is not original form included in the Jiva, but that's something we have the potential to develop in the context of embracing bhakti. So our original form basically is inherent in the Swarup Shakti. It's not inherent in the Tatastha Shakti. In the Swarup Shakti, it's inherent our ultimate devotional identity that will descend out of its own accord when our heart is properly prepared and purified by engaging in sadhana. That's the very definition of sadhana bhakti. Kriti sadhya pavye sadhyat bhavasa sadhanavida nityasidasya bhavasya prakityam hridi sadhyata. When the senses are engaged in the context of bhakti and therefore the chitta is purified, the bhava, who is eternally perfect and established in the heart of the nitya siddhas, will descend and will create a particular current and influence that will take the form of a particular spiritual form. So again, we are Anadi, we are conditioned without beginning. It doesn't mean we have a Swarup inherent in us or something. We have the potential for embracing bhakti and developing a bhakti Swarup when we locate ourselves under the influence of bhakti, as the Gita says, Daivim prakriti mashritaha mahatmanas tumam purta. So some ideas in that connection.
Okay. The thread has many other questions. So Maharaj will actually he takes his time out to address some of those questions later on. So I think now, Maharaj, we can conclude. If you want to give some concluding words for our
Yeah.
listeners.
Yeah, again, going back to the main topic of today, again, it's not an easy topic, and one of the main problems of this type of ideas is that we try sometimes to understand eternal realities with our mind, which is non-eternal. So sometimes we understand something comparing it with something that we have experienced here, but our experiences are all material here, so are related to objects that have a beginning and an end. So it's a difficult task for the guru to explain some of these topics with the language of material experience, and with an audience that has only mostly had material experiences. So in this way, the teacher may be limited by language, and the student may be limited by his or her own experience also. And that's why sometimes we may find some other statements in this regard. So since we are limited beings, at least for me, the conclusion, and going back to some initial words that I mentioned today, in connection to these complex topics, I acknowledge they are complex. This is not about defeating the anti-party, nor disturbing anyone's faith, or becoming more complex than what we need, but it's about sincerely knowing the truth if we feel the necessity. And sometimes that may be difficult. We have to be open that knowing the truth may not be that easier always. So in conclusion, again, this is not an exercise of how much one knows more than the other, but rather how willing we are to learn. So I personally pray to be blessed and with proper humility, and while speaking about all these topics, do not feel myself better than anyone. And if I say anything, hopefully it may be in the spirit of service of the.
That's why. Thank you, Maharaj. That's why I bring you on, because I feel like you have that humility and the way your demeanor, your behavior, and the way you express these things. Even if a devotee doesn't agree with you, still they can appreciate. Okay, this is Maharaj's. The way he's expressing it is very is palatable, and that's why I like having you on. Thank you, Maharaj, for joining me. As always, appreciate it, and hope we can do some more episodes, because I enjoy talking with you very much. I enjoy hearing from you, and for our listeners. This is episode 74. I'm trying to get to 100 episodes by the end of the year. I'm not having an episode next weekend because I have to go to a wedding, but I will allow this time that you can catch up, because I know a lot of devotees have not seen all the episodes, so please catch up. Oh, another thing is I'm banned from YouTube because of my Prahladananda Swami episode. They gave me a strike and they banned me for another 5 days. So that's why this is not live on YouTube. I know a lot of you have been watching on Facebook, but it's not on YouTube, but it will be on YouTube. This episode will also be immediately on YouTube on Maharaj's channel. Go check his channel out. Really nice. Swami Padmanabha on YouTube. There's his email there at the bottom if you want to get in contact with him. He's also on Instagram at Swami Padmanabha. So please check that out. He has some great content, great Krishna conscious stuff, not just about this topic, but about direct Krishna conscious things like Ramar Gita and really wonderful topics that we appreciate from him. So again, Maharaj, thank you so much for joining me. Please stay on. I'm going to turn off the live. Thank you everyone for listening. Have a great rest of your evening. Haribol.
Krishna Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare.